From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better developers. I'm Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
This episode of Fragmented is brought to you by educative.io. Now, there are a lot of websites out there that help you teach programming courses, but one thing most of them tend to do is focus on video, so they're all video-based. Educative.io takes a very different approach. To them, they go the text-based route. That means you don't necessarily have to scrub back and forth to follow along. Say, you're going through a video and someone just blows past a certain section, and then you're going back, wait, what did they say exactly? And you rewind, then open up a notepad to take notes. You don't have to do any of that with educative.io because it's text-based. Think of it as almost reading a book. If you're reading a book, it's pretty easy to skim back or double back and just easily skim through. In addition to a whole bunch of amazing courses out there, here's the kicker. If you're an Android developer, they just launched a killer Android course called Modern Android App Development. It's perfect. Just go back, refresh your memory, and go through the educative course. It has a fully functional live Android emulator, so you can actually create and deploy your app right from within the course. You'll get a live link to the app that you can share with friends or even, put up on your portfolio if you start looking for jobs. Check it out now and get an additional 10% off your purchase if you go through this special link, educative.io/fragmented. Once again, that's educative.io, EDUCATIVE, in case you didn't catch the spelling, educative.io/fragmented. Thanks again for sponsoring this show, Educative. So Don, I wanted to ask you about this question because I know you have, especially recently, a lot more experience in this. I recently released a YouTube video and it was about actually something completely different from Android. Uh-huh. It was about writing awk, AWK. Yeah, and this is one of those things. I love tinkering with command line tools and a lot of awk, sed, and one of these days I was actually working on a script, and then one of my colleagues was whoa, hold on, you actually remember this? You don't have to Google the stuff? And I was yeah, I usually do, but I've worked with a lot of these tooling that I'm comfortable with it. So I actually released a video, and I know we were talking about this. It was kind of funny. The keyboard I use is not my Kinesis, so I got a lot of questions there too, where people were wait, I thought you used a Kinesis. And I was I do. And I had one at work and at home, but I never thought we would get into this whole working from home situation. So I gave the one that I have at home to a colleague to try out and convert him into a Kinesis, only to realize after this that my Kinesis was stuck at work.
Oh, no.
But anyway, I've saved my Kinesis and it's safe and sound back at home. So if I release the next YouTube video, you'll probably see me use the Kinesis. But anyway, that's a tangent. The main point, though, is I noticed that awk is in some ways a programming language, and it actually has a very different mental model from mobile programming as such, the typical kind of programming that you and I do for the most part. And I wanted to have this discussion with you. I know we've been having it offhand, and I thought we'll just take it live.
Yeah.
What is your opinion about polyglot programmers? And we should probably start by defining what that is. But I wanted to ask, does it make sense? Is there value in it? Is there not value in it? Should you maybe, dig deep and get really good at one thing to be able to be effective as a software engineer these days? I just want all your thoughts around, what it is to be such a programmer.
Yes.
Good show, man. Catch you next week.
Just kidding. Thanks, guys. So for the folks that are wondering what the heck does polyglot mean? Polyglot, the definition is an adjective. It's knowing or using several languages.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is human, not human, non-programming, even regular language. Yeah. This is an English word, right? To be a polyglot. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can be a polyglot in many things. In our reference, we're talking about as programming languages. Would you be a programming language polyglot? My opinion is yes, super beneficial. And let me just preface this with saying on average, every day, I work with the following languages. I'm just going to list them out. I have my hand in front of me. I'm like, all right, I got. And some people are going to say, that's not really a language. That's a markup language. Whatever. I don't care. I'm not here to argue that.
I got the mic. Just listen to me now.
Yeah. This is my mic. Listen, it's my show. Get off my show. it's HTML. I got CSS. I got JavaScript. I'm in Rails, so I'm in Ruby. I'm in ERB. I am in Kotlin, Java, XML, JSON. Just off the top of my head, those. I'm in 9 now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, SQL. So I'm at 10. SQL. So I mean, just those are 10 that I'm in almost every day.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, why are you in multiple languages? Like, well, a lot of times, especially for you and I, Kaushik, we work up in the startup environment. And sometimes if I need to fix something in a server, like that server might be written in Node.js, it might be written in Ruby, it might be written in Python. Like, and I kind of, if I'm lucky enough to have learned that language or forced myself to learn it, like I need to go up there and make a change, I can go up there and do that. And so like I might need to make a change that's in Python that makes a change to some JSON that comes down to the client that's rendered in Kotlin that gets, or XML or whatever, you know what I mean? And it just kind of gets manipulated over. And I have to kind of do this in a full stack environment. And now, so to answer your initial question, do I think it's valuable to be a polyglot? Definitely. You are going to skyrocket your value as a programmer if you know multiple languages. Just look at any job posting out there. It never just says, hey, you just need to know Java. We don't care if you know anything else, just Java. Like that's very, very rare. Sure, at a major corporation where you're very siloed, that will happen, where like you're just a Java developer. But if you find any other positions out there, especially somewhere like Instacart or anything else, you're going to be in different languages. I mean, even 2015, me and you were at DroidCon NYC. We're sitting in the main room. I'm sitting with you and your coworker, and you and your coworker had a Rails app open.
Yeah.
I think it was probably the Instacart API probably. The Rails app was open, and you guys were fixing something in the API for Instacart while we're at DroidCon NYC 2015.
It was so funny. Yeah, we had like a local environment spun up and we were trying to like reproduce something and then, yeah.
So yeah, I think it's highly beneficial. Now there's many reasons for it, which we can get into. Now, what is your thoughts at a high level, 30,000 foot view? Do you think it's a beneficial thing to be a polyglot in programming languages?
I mean, without a question, right? The thing that like actually gets some people confused is because they think if I work at like a Google or like a Facebook, or I work at some of these huge organizations, where you have to take a language and maybe push it to the limits.
Yeah.
Or I know a lot of people who work in C and really have to like work with C at like a level where you really need to know. That's when they're like, oh, there's value in that. That is true. But I would say a lot in general, especially in like as you start out to like, the mid and like senior like phases of your career, it is super beneficial because in fact, I would say it's like more like necessary, right?
Yeah.
If you start out and you only look at one language, I remember like I started out in Java, and I think for the first 2 years, I was only in Java. Sure, I like learned Java pretty well. And this was like in web programming, so like, Spring and, Java Beans and all that stuff. The problem though is when you start to like learn new languages, your confidence levels increases. You feel like you can like jump into anything and learn it. And then I think that feeling is one that I missed early on, like in those first 2 years, because I was like only deep diving into like one language. What happens is when you start to like tinker with different languages, it opens up your mind. And the benefit, and I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast, even the language that you're using now, you tend to think about it differently and leverage it more by having some experience with different languages, right? Because different languages come with different paradigms, right?
Yeah.
And with those paradigms, you start to think, oh, maybe I should do that. I noticed that that's common because culturally also a lot of like these programming like languages, like, the Rails community or the Ruby community, they tend to have culturally like differences, right? For example, I think with Ruby, the whole short methods and like clean methods and like keep your naming simple, a lot of that is, the testing thing, a lot of that is like deep into the culture, right? In Java, there's like the object oriented programming, a lot of that is like very deep into the culture. In Python, I'm not working too much Python, but I know like scripting and like, machine learning and like leveraging the language to that kind of stuff. That's really important. Nowadays, we have Kotlin and we have Swift, which are like, the mix of both worlds, where you have like clean language syntax and you have like functional constructs. Different languages have different paradigms, and I would say it's really hard to learn that paradigm like in the language that you're comfortable with. You can't just say I'll learn this and I'll try to learn all these paradigms. How can you emulate this in my language? It doesn't always work. And so when your brain learns to think with these different paradigms, you start to get malleable, right, in terms of the ways that you think. And I think that's hugely beneficial. It is like a step function better. In my early days, I started with Java, but then I wanted to like just get comfortable. And it wasn't anything crazy, like you said. People don't know, like, but after like some time, I started to do HTML, CSS, and I went really deep into CSS. I wrote like my whole CSS like sort of framework, and I did a whole bunch of crazy things during that time. And I was a pure web designer, almost like a web developer, where I would like take markup designs and I would like build HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code to like represent that one-to-one. That just gave me a very different way of thinking. It gives you like a different like mode of thinking. From there, I moved to Rails and Ruby. From there, I moved to like, Java, because I went back into like Android development. And all these, and all this time, like I remember one of previous job, we were a much smaller shop. So I had to like actually go to our server rooms, and then I had to like mess with the server there. That's when I started to pick up a lot of like these other sort of languages, the utilities you use in Linux,
bash or whatever,
bash, the shells. You start to get very comfortable, and these are really powerful tools, especially a lot of the Linux utilities. Learning those things, I feel
my goodness,
they'll just stick forever. I find it very hard to believe that if you're like a serious programmer, that these utilities would not come in handy, like regardless of what you do, right? I mean, forget like even for work, I do so many things at home, like just to help my life be more productive. And this is like what I've started to do, like in the YouTube series, I like show some of these things that I think other people will be like find useful. That with these utilities, it's so easy. What would take me 1 hour, like if I'm manually opening a file and editing things, I can just use one of these scripts, and these are programming languages, right? So it's also fun because it leverages something that you already do. It is just absolutely essential in my thinking to like get that exposure, and if it so happens that you start to spend more time and you need to really dive deep, that'll happen in your career, right? Like as you start to like, or maybe you don't even wish to do that, Yes. For me, it's almost, I feel it's like a necessity. And another interesting anecdote, when we start to interview like a lot of engineers at Instacart these days, right? We don't even ask like we don't force people to use like a specific language. We just ask like, do we have these problems? Solve it in any language that you prefer. And we've gotten like some great people to work at Instacart just because, if they're really good at one language, they can really demonstrate that, and that is enough signal for us where if you're able to think in this way, that's something we can learn, and like apply. So being a polyglot is just absolutely essential, I feel.
Yeah, I think that what you just said really beckons back to the original post by, or maybe the book by Joel Spolsky. It's just smart and gets things done.
Interesting. I don't think I've read that one.
Yeah, and it's just the kind of thing is like, it doesn't really matter what their programming language is. Are they a C expert? Are they a Java expert? Kotlin? Are they Ruby? Same thing. If I give you a problem, can you solve it? Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're here to do as developers. We're not here to be an expert in language X, Y, or Z. We're here to solve business problems and to use the right tool at the right job for the right job at the right time. And that's really what you should be doing. And sometimes you're going to be inside of Bash, and you're going to be writing a Bash script because you need to automate something that works for everybody's environment. And what do you do in those instances? Like, well, if I know that I've already worked in Kotlin or Java, and I know I need to do an if statement. Well, what are you going to Google? You're going to Google Bash if statement, and you're going to find out how to do an if statement in Bash. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a little bit different. Oh, that makes sense. And then one of the things I really like about being like a polyglot in different programming languages is I will start to look for things in other programming languages, not even knowing if they exist. For example, I've been writing JavaScript since 1999. So a long time. And with the last number of years, I was doing a ton of Kotlin. And then just recently, in the last couple of weeks, I was doing a lot of JavaScript development in React and Node. And all of a sudden I was writing some code and I'm like, God, this is so verbose. Like I wish it was like a null operator in JavaScript. And I'm like, maybe there is now. And I Google it. Sure enough, there is. It's just like Kotlin's. And boom, there it is. There's also a null coalescing operator, if you're using certain transpiling options. And I wouldn't have known that unless I was working previously in Kotlin. And so what I'm trying to say is a lot of the knowledge you have from one language will automatically transpose into another one. And what you can also find is that when you're working or learning a new language, how to do something, you'll find these like little similarities. You're like, oh, we do that same thing in Kotlin. Or like, say a new language came out. I was learning Elixir a while back. I'm like, oh, they got that from C#. Or, hey, they got that from Ruby. And they combine the best things of Ruby and C# and all this and this and this and this into this other language. And so you start to see all these similarities, which makes it just so much easier to learn different languages.
No, that makes perfect sense. Recently, I was working with one of our iOS engineers in Swift, right? We were working on this thing and we were in this problem. And I was like, oh my God, there's got to be like, a scan operator of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And then sure enough, we look and there's a scan operator. Or like, I think there was another one where we were like talking about like reduce or something and we were looking for the equivalent, right?
Yeah.
It's just so helpful. Like and this is like a great example you pointed out. When you start to get comfortable with the language, it trains you to think about being able to apply a certain utility. So you start looking for this in like that language. And sure enough, a lot of these languages tend to sort of have like similar like concepts, right? Mm-hmm. So huge benefit there too.
Yeah. And this is also one reason why we had Eugenio on, I think it was episode
Marletti.
Marletti 100, way back in the 100s, early 100s, talking about Flutter. And that was what really piqued my interest about Flutter, is like what it could do. And then at the time, this is over 2 years ago, I was doing React back then too. And then I hopped into Flutter and I said, well, let me try writing a Flutter app. And all of a sudden I realized, I'm like, wait, Flutter basically took all the concept of React and put it into Flutter. And that's when I was just like, oh my goodness, like I totally love this. Like if you've done React, like kind of unidirectional data flow style, like it all just kind of makes sense. And so like I picked up Flutter really fast because I had already learned React. And what I want people to realize too is like when you and I say like we've learned it, it doesn't mean that we're like full on like master 100 level like developers. like no, I know how to build something in it and kind of figure things out as I go along. I might still be a beginner or intermediate level in a lot of these languages, but you know what? You say, hey, Don, I got this Python script that goes out and talks to a server and does X, Y, and Z. I need you to convert this to Kotlin. I'll figure it out.
There are very few languages where I can call myself an expert in,
mm-hmm.
but what I can call myself is, an efficient Googler in that language.
Yeah.
I can, find my way through. And I think that in itself is like pretty valuable. Also, sometimes when you're getting some things done, you don't necessarily need to be a master of that language to get, it goes back to what you're saying. As good software engineers, you're here to use software to solve problems, right? It doesn't say you need to solve it using Kotlin or you solve it using like C or Python or C#. It just means you have to solve a problem with software.
Yeah.
And, I think that is where there's benefits in understanding how to leverage that language and from different different aspects of different programming languages.
Which kind of brings us a good question at this point in time. Like, let's say that there's developers listening to this and there are that are been developing in Java and Kotlin and they've been in the JVM world for a long time. If you were to be working with one of these individuals and they were to say, hey, I would like to kind of dip my toe into something else, where would you recommend that they go from here? And then once you answer, I'll throw my answer in.
I think, at least my opinion is, if you've dealt with JVM related languages, it might be a good idea to start to branch out and choose like a slightly different kind of language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the one that's available to most people, I think, and despite it having similar names, is like JavaScript, right?
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript is just it's like really easy to get going with JavaScript, for better or for worse. As we have talked about in previous episodes, JavaScript is like a great language to like just fiddle around with, especially if you've been in the JVM world. That's one language. If you have like something against JavaScript, I'd say like Ruby is a great language personally.
Yeah, love Ruby.
It's so simple. It's just very elegant. And I forget the name of the series I used. It was basically, it told the story of Ruby as a book.
Oh, I forgot that one. I know what you're talking about. Oh my goodness. If we find it, we'll put it in the show notes. But so good though. So good.
It was like telling a story and you use Ruby to like get through the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was fantastic. I loved it. And I think like just choosing a language is a little different from your comfort zone. Ruby, JavaScript, great languages. Now, if you're already very familiar, like, if you're a programmer for like 20 years, I imagine you've run into things similar, or like any programmer who said they work for 20 years, I would bet money on that person having run through JavaScript at some point, right? If you want like something even like advanced or like different, I would say pick up like languages like Rust or like Elixir or something like that. Mm-hmm. Just to try like move out of your comfort zone. I think like that would be my advice. I mean, obviously there is no right answer. I feel you can pick any of these languages that are a little different and you'll still benefit from it. But if I were to ask you what would your recommendation be, right? And I was like, Don, just don't make me think. I don't like deal with like finding new languages. Just tell me, like, pick one like that you think would work. Given my background as a mobile developer, which one would you pick?
It's a good question. At this point in time, usually I approach it like a fork in the road. I get, we're driving down a straight road and we get to a point where it branches out in multiple directions. And then it's kind of a question I want to ask the developers, like, all right, well, what interests you? And like, does the web interest you? Does server-side technology interest you? Does embedded programming interest you? Like, where does your passion or interest lie? Like, where's your curiosity pull you towards? And usually wherever they're going to point to at that point in time is where I might point them to. So if it's like, hey, I'm really interested in building, a car radio, from the ground up, like, all right, well, then you need to see an assembly or whatever, like, it's over there. Like, I don't know anything about that. And then if they're like, well, I would really like to start building stuff on the web. And then at that point in time, it's like, okay, are you more interested in building client-side stuff or server-side stuff? And where do you want to go from there? And your answer of JavaScript is always going to be a solid opinion. Now, I'm going to caveat that with that I've spent I've been working in JavaScript for almost 20 years now. Or over 20 years, and it's changing drastically like every 2 weeks, it seems like.
Right. That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a very dynamic environment. There's a lot to learn that can be difficult and frustrating and hard to comprehend. However, there's so much out there that it can do. There's so many libraries that will integrate with different things. So if you want to do something, you can most likely do it in JavaScript, and that's a good place to learn. However, you also mentioned moving away from statically typed languages if you've already known JVM or Kotlin, moving to something dynamic. And I definitely feel the same as you. There's something like Ruby or Python, and I'm going to lean towards Ruby because that's where my favoritism lies. And the reason for that is like for me, I'm a builder. I like to build things. I don't care at the end of the day if this thing is a particular engineering, marvel of X, Y, and Z. Like, I don't care about that. Like, I don't care that we squeezed out 2 milliseconds of time. Like, right. Literally, that's my nightmare. I don't ever want to work on that. I don't want to work on a compiler. Like, that's not what I want to do. I like building products. It's just what I do. And so for me, I want to be as productive as possible. And for example, I've spent the last few weeks in JavaScript, which is Node.js for an API, and building React as a client. It works. There's a lot of powerful things that we can do. However, I've done the same exact thing in Rails, and I am like 20 times more productive in Rails. Just because of the way that Rails was built. It's built for you to be productive and get stuff done. So it really depends on what you want to do. And like, if you want to kind of just go, if you want to have like a free for all, just kind of like, I just kind of want to build things naturally as I feel fit and I don't want to be constrained by the environment, go to JavaScript. That's going to kind of be this wide open environment of whatever you want. If you want to build something that's like on the web, that's particular, you just want to kind of ship something, go take a look at Ruby. You're going to be more constrained in what you can do, but those constraints are there for a reason, to help you be more productive, to solve business problems. So what you're going to find, though, both directions you're going to go is there's going to be some similarities between these languages, and you're going to learn Ruby, and eventually, like, one day you're going to go learn Python. Like, oh, I can do this in Python. Oh, I did this inside of Ruby. And then you're going to have to write some JavaScript, and some of that stuff's going to make sense in JavaScript. And a lot, like you said, a lot of these language paradigms are going to just kind of just cross the boundaries between each of the individual languages, because you're going to recognize these patterns as you move along. It's just like when you learn, they say when you learn like Latin languages, like you've learned Spanish and Italian, these Latin-based languages, there's a lot of similarities that you're just going to instantly start picking up. And once you pick up a couple of them, it's just much easier to pick up more of them.
I think that makes perfect sense. I especially like your advice at the beginning where you're like, depends on your use case. I think that's a really good way to think about it too, right? Like, what problem do you want to solve? If it is like, well, I want to flash my keyboard and write like some crazy like assembly level thing, pick up something like that works with that. If you want to just write some basic scripts, like pick up something like Ruby or, like Python for scripting or something along those lines. If you want to build a web page, then JavaScript is a good choice. I like that approach, because that also keeps the motivation, because that's another aspect, right? Because sometimes you can't just like beat yourself into learning something, because you're like, oh my god, I'm doing this on the side, I have no incentive, I'm not being paid for this. Don told me I'll become a better programmer if I do this, but am I? Because this is like seems so dreadful. Usually when you spin it around to like having a specific use case where I was like, I need to write this script so I can get this running for running across and renaming a whole bunch of files for me. That makes it more enjoyable. Or, if I'm building this web page for, my significant other or my brother or my niece or something, where they're like, they need this thing and they want to like show it to their people, and it's easy enough for me to just build this website. Great opportunity. I think like those are the kind of things that'll really drive you to finding a specific use case and using different language to help with that use case.
Yeah. And I think that it's also important you have to also understand the complexity of some of these things. And what I want to say here might be a little controversial, is like, I feel the concept of a full stack developer is kind of BS.
Oh boy, Don. There we go. That's Twitter lighting up.
It is. But the reason why I say that is because, like I said, I've been deep inside of a full stack environment for a while now, that at one moment I'm writing SQL through Connects, which is a SQL JavaScript like layer. So I'm kind of writing SQL JavaScripty stuff to talk to a database. And the next second I'm writing an API with ECMAScript 6. And then the next 10 minutes later, I'm writing React with anonymous functions, transpiling, all kinds of stuff like that. So I am still writing JavaScript for end to end. So, but the problem is, like, I'm completely different frameworks, like completely different paradigms from top to bottom, and it's hard. And if I want to write let's say I want to write a data collection app for my local animal rescue site, right? They want to do some, anytime someone comes in to donate an animal or adopt an animal, they want to collect the information. Does that need to be a React app? No.
Yeah.
Like, why would that be
Definitely
a React
not.
app, dude?
Yeah.
Like there's no, like, it doesn't need performance. It doesn't need anything. It just needs to post data to a server and save it with some validation. To me, that's a perfect example of when I would use Rails.
Oh yeah. Rails is just like built for stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Get up and running quickly.
Yeah. Like you can take Rails to the limit. I mean, it can be an API and it can have React sitting on top of a Rails API. You can do all that. It's just like one of those things like, well, you'll see sometimes a lot of folks will be like, well, I'm learning Node and React. I'm like, well, what are you building? Oh, I'm building this, form for the people at my apartment complex to fill out when they have a problem inside of their apartment. And I'm like, why is that an API in React? Are you building an app for that too? No, it's just for the web. I'm like, well, why didn't you just make that, like, why do you need React for that? And I look at animations. I'm like, I get it, but
I don't think they're looking for animations.
I'm like, I think they just want it to work. I'm like, I don't think they care about any of that.
Right.
And so it's like one of those things. Like I always try to like ask myself, like, what am I trying to build? What's the use case, and what's the right tool for the right job? And sometimes you may not know that. And if you don't, that's, you can always feel free to reach out to, Stack Overflow or folks on on Twitter, or even us if you have questions.
Oh, for sure. And it's funny you bring up this thing, right? We talked about static blog, blog generating engines, and that's one of the reasons I still stick to Jekyll, right? Is it the best tool today? Probably not. There's like Hugo, there's like a whole bunch of things, but I know Ruby really well, right? I'm very comfortable in Ruby, so I've tweaked the hell out of Jekyll. Like my current website does all kinds of crazy things, right? I've written my own custom tagging related posts plugin, and so most people probably don't have to, but I'm very comfortable with it. Do I care that it's super performant? No, I mean it's generating static files. I don't care. So I've written it in Ruby. Is that the most efficient Ruby I've ever written? Probably not. But you know what? I understand it well, and I'm maintaining it, right? And it works great. I'm not going to move from this unless I find a good enough reason to change, right? It works great, and I'm comfortable with it. That's how you should be approaching it, right? Use something that you feel solves the problem and keeps you motivated.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing right there at the end, what you just said. It keeps you motivated. If you're not interested in it, then there's going to be no point in you learning it whatsoever. There was a point in time when I learned C and C++. Cool language, just not interested. It's just not my thing. I like to build things. I'm not productive in those languages. I like to use higher level languages where I can actually build things that people are going to use, and then move on from there.
This is solid advice. It's funny when you mentioned SQL, it reminded me of the days. I don't know if I've told you this, but I used to work a lot with SQL. Do you know what SQL is? It's the Oracle version. It's called procedural language extensions to SQL. Yeah, I know. So yeah, it's
kind of painful, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I remember that. It's got weird syntax, and he's like, what do I have to do for this table? And this, the stored procedure was kind of. I don't know. They even call them stored procedures. I don't remember.
Yeah, there's procedures, and Oracle built this whole world, and you would use that.
I forgot about that.
It taught me a lot about SQL, but let's just say I'm much happier writing my Kotlin these days.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. Even it's funny because I was working in I was in some code the other day that had to talk to Hadoop or something like that, and it was all Java, and instantaneously the first thought in my head was can I do this in Kotlin? We looked it up. I'm like, can I do this in Kotlin? It's yes. I was like, all right, cool. If we're writing any of this stuff in the future, I'm like, this is going straight up in Kotlin.
Alrighty, Don. If folks want to reach out on about questions about programming language advice, or what the next language that they want to tinker in is, what's a good place to do that?
They can reach me on Twitter or Instagram at Don Felker. And if folks want to talk to you about your latest scripts or videos or awk or all that crazy stuff you're working on, how can they reach out to you?
I am Kaushik Gopal on Twitter. And if you go to the blog that I talked about, which is blog.kaush.co, you'll find all the stuff there.
Fantastic.
Thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. I'd like to take this chance and thank the sponsor for this episode, Educative.io. There are a lot of websites out there that offer programming courses, but Educative.io has a really special text-based interface that helps folks learn faster and more efficiently. Check out the very new course they have for Android developers called Modern Android App Development. If you use the special link we have here, educative.io/fragmented, then you get an additional 10% off your purchase. So remember to use that special link. Once again, it's educative.io/fragmented. Thanks again for sponsoring the show. That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Don Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. Sarah the Amazing Jackson from the Spec Network helps with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme and ad music is by the national recording artist Blueprint from Weightless Recordings. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. In the next episode. In the next episode. In the next episode.